Hi class, I wanted to do another video on this stain texturing technique that I developed, and I wanted to show you one that's more specific to Maya. The initial video I did was using 3D Max. Now I want to do one showing Maya. Maya has its own kind of quirks in doing this kind of texturing. So what I wanted to do is kind of just talk about that before I go in there. Now, what we're doing is using blending modes like in Photoshop. So in Photoshop, we make layers, and then we can blend these layers together using different kind of blending modes. Photoshop has 26 different categories that you can blend your different ways you can blend your layers together to get the look that you want. Now, when you get into a 3D program, they're a little bit different. 3D Max on its Composite Node, which is the node that is like a layer system, like layers in Photoshop. It's got 24 categories, so it doesn't quite have as many as Photoshop, but it's pretty close. Okay, most of the major ones you would have in here, darken, subtraction, multiply, overlay, they're all in here. Okay. Now, when you get into Maya, Maya's pretty restrictive. Maya's layered texture node, which is its layer node, only has 12 categories that you can actually utilize to blend things together. So it's a little bit more restrictive than Max is. It doesn't quite have the flexibility. Okay. Another thing just to know that it always seems strange to me in Maya is in Photoshop, like when you make a new layer in Photoshop, it makes a layer on top wherever you've got selection. It'll make a layer on top of that. And that's the way that's the way Max does it too. And Max, when you click up here to create a new layer, it creates a layer on top. Okay. Maya is just the opposite of that. Every time you create a new layer in here, you click in this window, create a layer, it creates a layer at the bottom of the stack. Okay. So this is the top and this is the bottom. So if I was to click in here and make a new one, it always makes it at the bottom, and then you have to use your center mouse button to move it to the top. So that seems a little odd to me too, that every time you make a layer, it puts it on the bottom, but it still is flexible and you can do it. It's just make sure you understand that this is the top of the stack and that's the bottom of the stack. It's easier to understand it in Max because they stack, on top of each other, just like they do layers in Photoshop. So, you use Photoshop, that's pretty easy. Remember that. It's a little bit different in Maya. Okay. Okay, so let's just start off by doing something here. Let's go ahead and just grab part of his foot down here. And so we'll just isolate that and hit an F to bring that into focus. And so here's part of his foot, and I'm going to hit F3 to subdivide that. And then that's going to be leather. So we'll start off by creating a leather texture for this. Okay, so we'll just bring up the material editor, and of course, like I always make you guys do, I don't want you using any of these non-physical based materials. So we only want to use mental ray materials because they're physically accurate. So we're just going to go with a Mia material. That's kind of our go-to shader. Okay. And so let's just go over here and name this, and we're just going to call this leather. Okay. So this will be our leather shader, and we can go ahead and place it on our object. Okay. Maya 2016 is pretty buggy. Okay. It's pretty buggy. Okay, assign that to it. There we go. I would also tell you over here to, especially some of you don't have a great display card on this little display, this material viewer, you want it on hardware, not mental ray. It doesn't have to calculate all the reflections, everything, so you get a little bit better response from that. Okay, so right off the bat, our leather, this, a Mia material, similar to an Art and Design material in Max, when it's initially set up, when you bring it in here, it's kind of like porcelain. So, you always want to go in here and adjust that. Okay. Since this is going to be kind of a matte surface, I'm going to go to my roughness here. I'm going to be 0.5. That's how the underlying shader deals with the surface. Reflection, maybe 0.2, a little bit of reflection on it. and maybe 0.3 on its glossiness, and that's what I'm going to start with. Okay, so now we're ready to go in here and start creating our layer node. Okay, now the way that layer texture node in Maya is under other textures right here. It's kind of confusing because sometimes you might think it's under 2D textures or 3D textures, but it's under other textures, and there's the layered shader map right there. Okay, so basically this layer shader is just like layers in Photoshop, okay, or like the composite node in Max. Okay, so what we're going to do is to pick our shader and we're going to put it into our color slot. So I'm just right clicking, center mouse button, and dragging over here and putting that in. Okay, another way this can be done is you can take the output color right here and plug it into the diffuse. That's another way to do that too. You plug directly into these, or you can drag it over there, either way. Okay, so and we're just going to call this is our base leather. You really need to get in a habit of naming everything. By the way, in Maya, it doesn't like spaces and things. Now, when you're naming your materials, it'll automatically put an underscore in here. But in other areas in Maya, when you're using it, if you put a space in there, it doesn't function properly. Okay, so this is the color here. Okay, now to add a new layer, all I have to do is click right to the right of it, and it adds a new layer. If I click again, adds a new layer. To get rid of a layer, I hit the little plus button to get rid of those. Okay, now when you click on this, this layer is underneath that one, so the new layer is underneath. Okay, so if I was to come in here and we can just change this color so it's easy to see, then you'll see that even though I put this new layer, which normally if you were doing Photoshop or Max would be on top, then it would be turned purple, but it's not because that layer's underneath it. So you use the center mouse button to drag it over and drop it in here, and now it's on top and then it's purple. Okay. You can turn layers off. So once I'm on this layer, if I go right here, layers visible, and turn that off, then it's like turning that layer so we just see our layer off. So it's kind of like the eye in Photoshop. Okay. All right. So what I'm going to do here is initially go into this layer, and we're going to be making leather. So the first thing I'm going to do is kind of make a brownish tone. Okay. For my base leather. So I'm just trying to make a brown kind of a color. It doesn't have to be perfect. Okay. Not too saturated. And I'm going to go with something like that. Okay. Now, I always start with a base color underneath my patterning, especially with something like leather, because the leather patterns that you're going to find, most leather, the actual dimensionality and the pattern that we see is not based on color, but it's based on a bump in here. So when I'm using my Tileable texture, I kind of use a transparency with it. Okay. So there's my base color. Okay, so now I'm going to click on this one, and then I'm going to load a bitmap in here. So we go to File, and then right here. Okay, so here's my source images. Now I went ahead before I started this and went ahead and set up a project file, and I put the textures that I needed, and I put them into my source images so that Maya would find those. And so the first thing I'm going to get is I've got a tileable leather pattern. Okay. And so we're going to let's go ahead and just select all this and tell it to arrange it for us. And so we put it on this layer. Okay. This one right here. And we'll just call this is our base leather. Okay. And now I've got it off. I'm going to turn it on here. And then I'm going to turn it on over, which lays it over the top of the other color. And then I can kind of dial in how much I want. Okay. Now, the initial problem that we're getting into is we need to put some mapping coordinates on this now. Okay. So let me just go in here and I'll show you what we're actually putting on. Source images, and here is the actual tileable leather that I've got that I'm using, going to tile across the surface. Okay, so that's what we're putting on the surface. All right, so to get my mapping coordinates on here, okay, what I'm going to do is to pick our object, then you're going to go up here to UV, and then you're going to go down here to automatic, and then click this little box to the right side. Now, what you want this on is 3 sides, okay, which basically this, this technique that I'm using is based on box modeling, okay, and Maya doesn't have box modeling. It's kind of strange, Max has box modeling. A lot of softwares have box modeling. For some reason, Maya doesn't have box modeling. What it does have, though, is an automatic projection that'll make as many planes as you want. So it's kind of like box modeling. And I only need 3. I don't need 6. I don't need a separate one on each side. I just need 3. Okay, and then I'm going to turn off this create new UV set. Now, the way you can think of UV sets, it's layers of UVs, okay? And I want this on our base set. So I'm going to turn this off so it doesn't create a new layer, okay? And I'm going to apply that to it, okay? Now, that gives me a set of controls that I can come in here and I can adjust how that tileable is going on there. But the projection that we're doing by default is fine. So I really don't need to do that, okay? And so now we're doing what's called box modeling on this. If I actually open up the UV editor, it's done an automatic unwrap of this based on a plane from the top, a plane from the side, and a plane from the front. Okay. And so since we're using a tileable texture, you will get some seams in it. Okay. So if I go object mode, you will see a little bit of seam here and there, but it really doesn't make any difference because once we layer this up, you won't be able to see this seams anymore. Okay. So I'm not really worried about the seam. It's one of the things we worry a lot about when we're texturing things, but with this method, I don't worry about them too much because we're stacking things on top and the next one will overlay it and you really won't see it in the end. Okay. Now some other things that I can do to this is, if I go to matter of fact, I want to name this. So we'll pick this node. Okay. That's my base layer, leather. That's fine. And then if I go to this node, this is my, scale. Okay. The scale that I wanted. So right here, it says repeat, UVs. I'm going to hit 4 on both of these. And then that's going to get me the scale of the texture to be, pretty much what I want. Okay. And this is really leaking out a little bit. If I shut this viewport and brought it back in. Oh, sure doesn't like that. Okay, but that's all right. All right, so we can kind of see the scale of what's going on there. Now, another cool little thing you can do while we're working on this is if you bring up your render editor, okay, and what you can do is, let's get a little bit closer on this, and I usually put it over here on the right to kind of stack things kind of like that. And let's update that. Then what you can do is click this IPR. Now IPR is going to automatically update a render based on a box that I draw in here. So it's going to automatically update this as I work. Okay. So I can bring my material editor back in, and as I add things into this, it'll update over there, which is kind of cool. It's not a perfect update, but it's pretty good. Okay, so that gets me my kind of my base leather on there. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is start adding onto my layers for staining. So I'm going to go right here, and I'm going to add a new layer on here. Okay, and in that leather, and on that one, another file, and in that file, I've got a tileable concrete texture that I'm going to put in here. Okay. And then if we go back to our layer, matter of fact, I'm going to go ahead and select all these and tell it to rearrange them. I don't think it actually does this right, but it'll be fine. So, okay, so this is a new one. We're going to put it on top. there's our stain, okay. And we're going to call this one concrete stain. And I'm just going to try to keep these in order. I don't know why it puts them in reverse order when you tell it to clean this up, but it does. Okay, and so we're going to go into its base coordinates, and we'll do the same thing, about 4 on that, and that works okay. All right, that's working pretty good. And then if we go over to, you'll see it's automatically rendering our updates for us. Okay, so now on our leather, I'm going to put this on to multiply, and then it's going to multiply and lay that stain over the top of it. Okay, now how much you overlay it is determined here, so you can turn it down. Now, one of the things I am having to do because of Maya's limited ability to deal with the it only has, you know, a limited amount of blending modes. I had to go back to my original file that I was using in Max, and I had to come in here and add some contrast to it so that it popped out better. I also did, it made it titleable in a square. Max is pretty easy to have titleable in rectangles, and you can do that in Maya too, but it's easier if everything's square. So if you get a habit of making everything squares, it's easier. And so now we've got that stain on there, okay. And sometimes this IPR will have to be, you know, you'll have to do it again. It wigs out a little bit. Now, another thing is, you see how this has got a black background? I really don't like black backgrounds when I'm trying to match my colors and stuff, because it's kind of makes it hard to see. So if you go up here and you actually go view, select camera, then on your attribute editor here, if you go down to environment, then you can set it so it's kind of a dark gray, but not really a black. And that's going to make it a little bit easier to see what's going on. Okay. And that's an attribute to the camera itself. Okay. So that's staining on there is looking pretty good. Okay. So now we'll come back into the material editor, and let's lay another layer on here. Okay, so we're going to click to add another one, and I'm going to click on that one, and then I'm going to go to File, and I'm going to load this one called Cracks. I've got one in here to put cracks on things. Okay, so we want to name this one Cracks. Okay, then back to our layer, and then we're going to take Cracks, and we're center mouse button, click it and pull it over here so it's on top. Okay, and I'm going to do the same down here. I'm going to grab these and put them on top, because that way I'm keeping them in the order that they're stacked over here. Okay, and so we're going to go back to its coordinates, and we're going to go for there, for here. And they don't have, all these have been 4. They don't have to be 4. You just got to mess with it to see what you like. Okay, that's going to add us some cracks on there, which is really nice. Okay, so we go back, and on that one, we're going to add a multiply. And then where it says alpha, this is like your opacity of this, so I can pull it down. So this is not as dominant on top of there. I don't want it to just jump out, scream at me pattern. That looks pretty good. Okay, so that looks pretty good on there. Now, another attribute that you may not be aware of is you can isolate things in here. So we have these little S's on these, and when you click on that, then that just shows that texture on there. Okay, it's called solo. So when I solo here, then I'm just going to see that stain that's on there, and then the cracks that were put on there. Okay. Okay, the next thing I want to deal with is putting a bump in here. So I'm going to go back to my layered. I'm going to make another layer. Okay, this will be my bump layer node. And then I'm going to drop that into our bump slot. Center mouse click, drop it in there. That'll give you a bump value in here, which is the amount. And then we have nothing driving the bump yet. So what I'm going to do is to come in here and start. I'm going to take this leather and drop it into there. And I'm going to solo this. Okay. When you solo it, it's just going to show you the bottom color, and it's put our bump in here. Okay, now I'm also going to want a second bump in here. So I'm going to add that. And I want that one to be those cracks. So we're going to go to cracks and drop those in. And I think what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to change this color. Okay, let's look at it over here. And you can see that that bump's way too much. So what I'm going to do is initially come in here. And I'm going to turn off this layer. So all I have is this base layer. Okay. And we want that to be okay. So I have this, the layer with the cracks off. So all I'm seeing is the bump from our, leather texture. And so now I can start turning this down. I'm going to go for maybe like 0.3. So we have a subtle bump on it, but we don't want it too dominant. Okay. And then let's go back and turn this other one back on. And so it's going to lay it on top of there. And then I can come back and back off of that, of how much I want those cracks to be on there. And looks like we need to, on those cracks, I think I'm going to go a little bit smaller on those. Yeah, that's better. Okay, and back off of those a little bit so they're not as dominant in there. Come back to my bump. I'm turn it down to maybe 0.2. Okay, then that's working pretty good. Okay, I'm going to turn my colors back on. Now, one of the things I notice I see a lot of people doing is wanting to do black leather. And I would tell you, you want to stay away from that like it's the plague. Okay. And you want to do that because it's really hard to light black things. Okay. And so, once you've got it down and you know what you're doing, then fine. But for right now, I would tell you I would stay away from it. Okay, so that's pretty much how you do your layer nodes. Okay, so I've got a layer node here, and then I've got a base leather, and then I've got some concrete staining in on top of that, and some cracks on top of that. Then I come into my bump, and I'm using the same texture for my initial map that's on there for the pattern, and then laying the cracks back on top of it to give some aged look to it. Okay, let me explain some things about sets here. Okay, so we're going to go into here into UV, and we're going to go to the set editor. Okay, and when I pick the object, then it's going to have sets in here, and sets are like layers in Photoshop. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and pick this initial one. I'm going to rename it, and this is going to be our Tileable _ leather. Okay. Now, why that's important is that when you go into your UV editor, it's going to show up here under textures all of the different textures that are kind of chained to this. Okay. So if I click on base leather, it's showing me the base leather. Okay. If I go to the concrete, then it's going to show me that in here. Okay. Now, sometimes what we want to do is put multiple mapping coordinates on things. And so we want one mapping coordinate to control what's happening with our base color, and then a different one for another color. Okay, you can do that. What you do is, by the way, to get to that gizmo that was in there, if you go back, if you pick your object, go back to, I need to bit the object mode, go back to channel editor. Okay, you'll see if I go up here to my attribute editor, that there is my projection. See where it says poly auto projection right there, and I can name this, and this is my base leather, and I know that's the coordinate that's controlling this base leather I put in here. Oh, excuse me. Okay, so if you go to channel editor and then you click on it right here, then you can get to that gizmo again, and then I can start doing things like scale things. Okay, now what's happening right now is all of these are all on the same. Okay, so they're all in the same coordinates, so it's adjusting all of them at the same time, and that may not be what I want. Maybe I want the leather pattern to be the way it is, but I want to adjust the stain that's on top of it. Okay, so if that's the case, then I'm going to go back to my automatic UV unwrap to put a UV planer to put a box map. But now I want to create a new UV set. So it's going to be a stacked coordinate on top of this one. So this is a coordinate that you have. I'm going to do another one on top of it. Okay, we're going to call this one just stain. Okay, and then make sure you've got your object picked, and then apply that. Okay, and then it applies a separate coordinate for that. Okay, and so we're going to call that one we'll call this one stain. So this is my stain projection. Okay, so then when I go over to my channel box, they're listed in here, and I can pick it, and that's the coordinate for that. Okay, now I have to link the texture to it. Okay, so these are my sets, and if I go to my material editor, you'll see I've got different sets in here, but I don't know what texture is linked to which one. Okay, so to do that, you go under Windows, and you're going to go Relationship Editors, pull down to UV Linking and UV Centric. This brings up where you can link things. Okay, so here's my Tileable leather. I want that to be linked to, well, I'll just leave it to all of them right now, but then I'm going to go to the stain, and I'm going to do the stain to my concrete stain. Okay, so now I can go in here and I can go to stain, And then when I adjust that, you can see it's adjusting the one on there, but it's not moving the other two. Okay. And other things you can do is, you can rotate these any which way you want. Okay. And that's what allows you to get into a state where they don't line up with each other, where one doesn't line with the other, because I can put multiple in here. So right here, if I pick it now, I can go UV sets and I have multiple ones. And which one do I want to see? Here's the UV set for the stain. There's the one for the base leather. Okay. And so I'm looking at the stain here. If I go textures here, okay, then I can click on stain, and there's the stain that goes with that. So you kind of link those together, and that's how you do that. Okay, now the wonderful thing about this, or one of the wonderful things, is once I have one piece of letter done, then I'm ready to roll. Okay, so let's go in here. And I can come into this piece here. And then all I have to do is get its base coordinates. So I go automatic, unwrap, 3, don't create a UV set, apply that to it. Okay. Go ahead, I'm going to go to object mode. And let's smooth that. And now all I have to do is apply that same texture to it. And now that's on there. And then it's got its own set of coordinates I can put in here and adjust that too. Okay, you've got this piece of leather. Okay, so I could come in and I'm going to apply that to it as well. And then I need to give that one some coordinates. So same thing, automatic, apply. And go back to object, subdivide. And there's that leather on there. So if you take the time to get the leather made, looks nice, then it's easy to copy it from one thing to the other and get all your leathers, and they're all a little bit different. Okay. Now there is some things about this that you want to see because of the nature of what it's doing. Okay. Can you see it stretching along the edge? That's because we're projecting it and then we're subdividing it, and we don't have very many locking loops along the edge, so it's kind of pulling it in. So the way you want to kind of do this is step all the way down, okay, so we don't have any subdivision, and actually bake a subdivision in, okay. So if I go to mesh, smooth, and I click this little button to come in here, I want this set to 1 to subdivide it one time, okay. And now once that's done, I'm just going to come back in here and auto unwrap it again. And now you'll see that's fixed that. And then if I need to subdivide it again, I just hit 3 on the keyboard. And so now you'll see that's fixed all that stretching that was on there. Okay, so what we're doing is just baking one subdivision in at the base. And then projecting on top of that so it's not pulling the edges as much. Now, another thing that you need to be able to do and let's look at this. I guess we just need this and that. Oops. And that's for our rivets. Okay, so I'm going to step this down. All right, we want to put some metal, and I said rivets, I'm sorry, eyelets. We want to put some metal on these eyelets, okay? So to do that, what you're going to need to do is to select that geometry. So I'm going to go in here, face selection, and then I'm just going to drag a box around that to select all of that. And then I'm holding down the control key and deselecting what I don't need, which are these pieces out there, and that gives me that whole piece right there. Make sure that you're not projecting through it. It's picking something on the back side of your object in here. To a certain degree, this under here doesn't make any difference because you can't see any of that. Okay, now I have that eyelet. Now, a good thing to do is to go to Create Sets and go a quick selection set and give it a name. I'm going to call this Eyelet 1. And I'm going to click Add to Shelf, and it's going to add me a button up here on my shelf. Now, the reason that's a benefit is I can come in here and actually subdivide this. And then I can come back and choose this, and it's going to pick that eyelet, okay? And so now I can come in here and make a shader for that. So I'm going to go ahead and name this one my base leather. Okay, and then I'm going to call this one my eyelet. Okay, let's get a mental ray material. We'll get a Mia material for that. And we're going to call this eyelet. And then I want to apply that to our selection set. So I just click this button and then apply that. Now that's applied to that. Okay. And I'm going to go ahead and use a preset in here. I'm going to go ahead and get copper, and then I'm just going to change the color. Go with the blue, a little more of a steel look to it. And now one of the things that I would recommend doing this is, on this metal, is go ahead and come in and bring your layered texture in. And the reason we're going to do that is we're going to plug that into both our color slots for our reflection and the diffuse. And that way, whatever color I set in here, it'll run it for the diffuse and the reflection at the same time. So it's actually putting it in my diffuse slot and reflection. So if I change the color of this, it changes both of those. Okay. And then that's going to give me a certain look that I want for my rivets. And so you can create multiple little selection sets. That way you can come back to your rivets. And that's pretty much how it's done. Okay. If I come in here, let's unhide everything. And let's say I need, this shoulder strap is leather. So I'll come into here. I'm going to go up to my mesh, smooth, subdivide it once. Okay. Now this will be good for our unwrapping. So automatic box, no UV set, apply. And then it's ready for me to assign. Okay. Put the wrong one on there. Let's put the leather on there. That's what we need to put on there. And there's our leather ready to go. So because I didn't sit there and unwrap each one of these and take them into Mudbox or Photoshop and paint them, but I made a tileable texture that would go in there. I've got it stained. I can tile that up on there and make it so that And I can actually make separate ones. You know, if I wanted to, I could come in and make a separate texture for each one of these. Like if I wanted to give it a little bit different color on one of them or something, okay, all I'd have to do is to come in here in your material editor and we just pick our leather, go to, I'm going to go to another tab and I'm going to edit, duplicate the shading network. And now it's given me a copy of that, a new copy called Leather 1. And now I've got two versions. I've got the original version and I've got another version. Then I could go in here and start altering some of this and apply it to objects and alter the leather as I go through there, all from building, you know, spending the time to build one and then coming back and remodifying that to get me several different ones in here. Okay. So this method is pretty, it's not that hard to do. Okay. Of course, you need to have tileable textures, and I already created those in Photoshop. And if you looked in the other video, I kind of went through how I created the tileable textures in there. The difference in this is I created all these tileable textures as squares, where I didn't have to do that. In Max is pretty easy using rectangles and stuff, because Max has got a tool where you can automatically adjust the mapping coordinate to fit the bitmap, and Maya doesn't have that. The only other thing to make sure you understand is that once we project on here, then we've got a poly projection right there. We can name it right here. This is the projection for the leather. And then if we want to adjust that, if we go to the channel box here, and you'll see it listed right there, leather. When I click on that, it should have given me my coordinates. Oh, there it is down there. Okay, and then I can adjust things. Scale, you know, you can manually adjust this. This is what I was doing with the Mac stuff, rotating, pick the rotation, and then you can rotate this where you can kind of get them coming at different angles and stuff. So all of that can be done similar to what I showed in the Max. Okay, so that's pretty much how you do your leather, and it's pretty easy to get it all done. Of course, these have little rivets on there, but I'm going to come back the next week. Next week, we'll start doing metal, and I'll come in and lecture with that. We're going to use some procedural textures for doing the metal. So, you know, I'm trying to show you guys a bunch of different techniques to how to approach things. You know, the typical thing you see out there on the internet is, oh, we unwrap everything. We unwrap everything. You know, that's all crap. You don't have to unwrap everything. Sometimes we want to unwrap things, but this I've not unwrapped at all. And I'm able to get a really nice texture on it. Okay. Because of the way I'm layering it and using this staining technique. Okay. Subdivide that. Nice and smooth and ready to go. Okay, so hopefully this helped you Maya people understanding how to approach it with Maya, in which that you're using this layer node, and then I'll use a layer node. I'll use two layer nodes, one for the diffuse, and then another layer node that I'm using down for the bump. Okay, and then I'm isolating what I want to use for the bump, and then this node is how much bump you want on it, and then these nodes over here on each one of these textures is how big or small you want that texture. And then you can do other things in here. You can rotate this stuff in here too. You've got rotations and offsets where you can move it left and right. This is all in here, or you can do it with that gizmo, either one. Okay, so hopefully that helped you guys. Okay, thank you very much.